It was necromancing, which is the absolute worst skill a hunter could possibly have. A legendary individual who is currently one of just 5 hunters in the world to hold the SSS class. The public, on the other hand, has a low opinion of him due to the fact that he has spent his entire life working as a hunting dog for a business. Even when he was knocked out after receiving deadly wounds and being carried out of the gate, he managed to stay alive even after all of his co-workers perished, despite the fact that many thought he was repulsive. He was given the title of the Immortal King. Kang Taeha is the one who is spared from death. It was a foregone conclusion that even he would not be able to escape the Cave of Death because the guy who was responsible for it was none other than his rival from the guild that he was a member of. But Kang Taeha was able to endure the battle that lasted for 6 months. In addition, he made the decision to engage in combat with the Griffin's headquarters today. Kang stated that it seems as though the minor players each have their own desire for money. Just look at them coming in when they don't have a place of their own. And then he raises his hand to generate some pressure. On the other hand, his adversaries were yelling at each other to eliminate Kang, and they don't care if he lives or dies as long as they get their hands on the 5 million golds that are being offered to the person who can catch him. Others have suggested that they must block him in order to prevent him from calling forth his bone dragon. Kang's adversary quickly strikes him with their sword, but Kang remains cool as he calls forth his bone dragon by using his might and placing his hand on the ground. After that, a tremendous amount of light and force appear. After then, his dragon materialized above him in the sky. As soon as they laid eyes on the dragon, his adversaries were overcome with shock and terror. They were completely at a loss as to how they might best Kang at that time. However, in the building where the fight was taking place, a light was shattered, and then it exploded as a result of the bone dragon's sudden flight as it attempted to flee the structure. Kang was positioned such that it appeared as though he was in control of the bone dragon while he stood on its neck. When Kang's opponent looks up and sees him with his bone dragon, they are shocked to see that he still possesses enough mana to summon the dragon. On the other hand, Kang abruptly cursed because he had used too much mana, which caused blood to come out of his mouth. As a consequence, he quickly covers it with his hand as if nothing had happened. As his bone dragon went by a structure, he became aware that someone was standing there and looking in his direction. It was Yo Jeju, Griffin's guildmaster, and said that he was completely surprised. In addition, Yo was standing by the window when Kang soared in front of him with his bone dragon, which was storing a power in the shape of light in its mouth. Kang became aware of something approaching just as the dragon was about to launch its attack. It was a blow delivered by his adversaries on the ground, who were striking him at the time, and they used a holy harpoon shape in the light. As a result of the harpoon, Kang's bone dragon grew agitated, and it collided with the building, causing one of its wings to be hit. As a result, his dragon stuttered in pain, and Kang directed the dragon to fly up. However, before they could get fly up, another harpoon struck his bone dragon, and he watched as the arrow entered the creature's skull. Afterwards, they are struck by multiple harpoons coming from a variety of directions, and each one of them penetrates a different section of the bone dragon. They both ended up falling to the ground, which resulted in the production of smoke and the destruction of the ground. Holy Knight's team sees him, exclaimed his opponent. Afterwards, Kang was trying to stand, but he was now surrounded by numerous knights. Yo told him to give up, but Kang didn't want to give up, and Yo never saw him giving up just like that. Yo's expression changes to a grin out of nowhere, and he comments that he hasn't seen Kang give up at any point. Kang managed to rise up despite the fact that blood was coming out of his mouth, and he furrowed his brow as he did so. He inquires of Yo the reason behind his asking him such a pointless question. In response, Yo approached him while wielding a staff and moved closer to him. He stated that he desired for things to proceed exactly how he had anticipated it would. But Kang was the only one who consistently behaved in a manner that was inconsistent with his expectations. Kang defied his expectations to survive in that land of death and emerged from the experience more powerful than he had expected. In the end, he even persisted and was successful in obtaining whatever it was that Kang was holding. On the other hand, Kang was seen clutching a nameless stone, and its quality and impact are unknown to anybody else. Kang brought the stone closer to him so that he could examine it more closely, and he questioned Yo as to whether or not he was referring to the stone. When Yo saw the nameless stone, his eyes immediately opened, and he burst out laughing. He then declared that the nameless stone is a sufficient justification for him to kill Kang. However, if Kang is willing to hand it up to him, he will release Kang without causing him any kind of pain. "You want this stone badly?" asked Kang. Yo urges Kang to hand over the stone because it is something that will be useful to him in the future. Kang is so convinced that Yo is correct that he uses his power to cause the stone to float in Yo's direction. The latter was anticipating that the stone would land in his hand, but Kang grabbed it out of nowhere and grinned as he did so. He had been playing a prank on Yo, and Kang was not an idiot who would willingly give up the stone. Kang mentioned that he had heard that Yo had spent his entire life searching for that stone. Because he had already consumed the stone, he needed to find a way to retrieve it from inside his body, so he questioned Yo about whether or not he could kill him to get the stone inside his body. When Yo watched Kang swallow the stone, he was taken aback. As a consequence, he became infuriated and ordered all of his team members to cut open Kang's stomach in order to retrieve the stone. On the other hand, Kang formed a grin on his face and was creating a massive force on his hand. "I'll take as many as I can as my comrade," exclaimed Kang, then strike his massive force towards his opponent in one blow. And in this manner, the horrendous night came to an end. And due to the fact that he was fatigued, it is okay to take a break, and he passed away. Afterwards, a senior citizen was shaken up and taken aback by something, while a younger man fought back the tear that was forming in his eye while trying to contain his elation at the fact that his young master had at last awake. The elderly man fled in terror because he believed the person lying on the casket was a ghost. Two individuals were having a conversation in the Jejong Palace about how the Bukun clan's eldest son had been brought back to life. They are both interested in knowing what took place. They inquire as to whether or not the mortician is, in fact, a necromancer. According to the young person, the firstborn son did not return to life, but rather transformed into a Jiangshi after his death. According to the older person, the reason why he thought it was that way was because he read too much fiction. In addition to this, he claimed that the eldest son had ingested a large quantity of remedies, which led to his falling asleep and appearing to be a corpse. But the younger person reasoned that if it's Liu Xinyun, then it may very well be plausible. The older person cautions the younger person to watch what he says since members of the Bukun clan may overhear what he has to say. But the younger person was too obstinate, and he reasoned out what the issue would be if the Bukun clan was now a tiger without teeth. Meanwhile, Kang stands up in his bed and searches for a mirror so that he can examine his appearance. When he looked in the mirror, he was shocked to see that he had grown so large that he resembled a pig. He pinched his cheeks as if the expression might shift, but it remained the same. He believed that through training his grinding bones, he was able to keep his muscles in good shape. But now, he was reincarnated on a big body. Kang had also been told that the owner of the body he had reborn with was a prodigy who appeared to have spent his entire life feeding himself. Il-gong-ya had an unhealthy obsession with food, ladies, and beverages. He abruptly laid his large frame down on the bed while thinking about him being a naked toddler who used a shovel to spread his feces all around the billboard representing the Bukun clan. A person who, in the end, was unable to breathe due to his addiction to remedy. It was a mystery to Kang how he had come to be reincarnated as a pig in ancient China after living a dissolute life. Nameless stone is the sole factor that may have contributed to the occurrence of something like that. He recalled the reason that Yo was looking for the stone with such determination. When he realized that the old man had missed the chance to revitalize himself right in front of his eyes and that he must have been insane as a result, he couldn't help but break out in a spontaneous grin. He got out of bed all of a sudden when he had the notion. What is he doing when he can lose weight whenever he wants to if he does his training routine just like he did in his previous life? But first and foremost, he has to ensure his own survival in that strange environment. He was taken aback when a hologram suddenly appeared in front of his face and informed him that the player was attempting to enter into the interface system. But there was an error because the player's information had changed since the last time they logged in. In addition to this, the hologram informed him that the player is in the process of updating its information and cautioned him that the disparity in quality between the player's soul and body was too great. When he saw his name as the player, his eyes widened in surprise. His trait is necromancy. His strength was at level 7, his health was at level 6, his agility was at level 5, his magic power was at level 3, and his level was reduced to 1. Because Kang appears to be losing interest in viewing the hologram, he gives the command for the hologram to disappear. He reassured himself that the necessary abilities were still present, which would allow him to gradually build up his power. But in addition to the strength, the hologram also indicated that the person embarked on necromancy, which means that they have not engaged in any form of physical conflict. However, he chose to disregard it given that there was no way for him to go back. To discover what the consequence of the nameless stone that he ingested in his former life was. All that was required of him was to pass away once more. But it wasn't the method either, because there's no way that there's a gate in Jejong from which he could obtain another nameless stone. He reassured himself that no matter what occurs, at least there are no monsters in that place. He was sick of engaging in bloody confrontations with those monsters, and the absence of creatures in that location means he can get away from that situation. He then breaks into a broad grin as he realizes that he may now begin his life in that place. As of that same instant, he shall henceforth be referred to as Liu Xinyun. However, when someone unexpectedly entered his room, he was taken aback, and they complimented him on how well he appeared to be maintaining his good health. That individual was being prevented from entering the room by a servant who was following close behind them. It was Yu Jinsang who was involved, because his master had instructed him not to let anybody else inside the chamber. The servant was pleading with Jinsang not to enter the room. However, the servant is unable to finish his sentence because Jinsang became enraged and told the servant that he had the audacity to issue orders despite the fact that he was only a servant. Kang, who was wondering who Jinsang was watching what was taking place when all of a sudden he stepped over to the servant and asked him if he was okay. Jinsang scoffed, however, and stated that even if Woon were to be resurrected, he would continue to be as stupid as he was before. However, the servant suddenly falls on his knees and begs Woon for mercy, explaining that Woon had commanded him not to let anybody else in. Jinsang stops the lowly servant in the middle of his speech, saying that Woon is taking care of the humble servant even though it doesn't suit him, and the servant is unable to finish his sentence. On the other hand, Kang approaches the servant and inquires about his ability to stand. He kneels down to go closer to the servant so that the servant might assist him in standing, and he suddenly asks who Jinsang is. The servant hears him whispering that Jinsang was actually his half-brother. Afterwards, Jinsang questioned Woon about the reason he didn't react to the inquiry that he made. On the other hand, an elderly man walked into his room and told him that Woon may have lost his memory and didn't recognize his half-brother. Additionally, he instructed Woon to show magnanimity and pardon to Jinsang. Quack Woon-san was his name, and he was the leader of the Red Clouds faction. Kang was taken aback when his servant abruptly cautioned Quack to watch what he said in front of the young master because he needed to refer to Woon as Lord at that very moment. Kang had the impression, based on the information he had received over the course of the previous several days, that the Lord, his father Yu-Ho-Yol, had fallen ill, and that the role of Lord was now vacant. But the fact that Quack refers to Jinsang as a Lord demonstrates that he is disregarding him. In addition, Quack observed that Woon had immediately furrowed his brow, so he explained that he had unintentionally referred to Jinsang as Lord because the latter had taken over the post after the former fainted. Jinsang, on the other hand, cautioned Quack to exercise caution since it could make Woon feel bad, after which they would both laugh as though they were laughing at Woon. Kang, on the other hand, ruminates on the origin of the two Cretans in this conversation. When Quack referred to Jinsang once more as Lord and looked to be making fun of him, he grew enraged. Quack then informs Jinsang that it is time for them to meet with the leader of the faction, so Quack explains that this is because they had previously checked Woon's health. Quack was instructed by the leader of the faction that he must make elaborate preparations in order to extend his congratulations to the leader of Dongryong. They were laughing so hard that they didn't see when Woon suddenly jumped towards them and smacked Jinsang on the neck. This occurred as the two were getting ready to leave the place. Quack immediately whirled around and was enraged. However, he was taken aback when he saw that Woon had allowed the punch to be delivered. He thought to himself that it's not like he didn't sense Woon, but how could he be squared by a guy who hasn't even learned martial arts the right way? He was confused. However, because of the rage that was welling up inside of him, Jinsang's brow became wrinkled. He suddenly switched his attention to Woon just as he was ready to draw his blade and execute his plan to kill him. However, he suddenly became frightened and was unable to grasp his sword because he observed something peculiar at Woon. Quack was bewildered because he observed that Jinsang, who was now perspiring, did not draw his sword. In addition, Quack became aware that the door to Woon's room was ajar and that other people were observing them from outside. Because of this, he communicates with Jin-sung using his mind, telling her that they need to wrap it up and head back because there are a lot of eyes watching them. Kang was oblivious to the fact that they are speaking non-verbally, and will not question whether or not it is the complete tone he learned about in martial arts. The servant that was on his side did not fully understand what had taken place. However, Quack and Jinsang unexpectedly walked through the door together, and Jinsang commented to Quack that his half-brother appears to be acting irrationally before leaving Woon and the servant. Kang suddenly sighs in relief and thinks that Jinsang was not that big. But as soon as he felt something on his head, he furrowed his brow and clenched his teeth in a startling display of anger. The servant who was so concerned about him inquired as to whether or not he was okay and whether or not he should contact the medical personnel. Kang heard a voice and said that he should have lived as a prodigy until the end according to his character. He was coveting the position of the Lord after all those years. Won't suddenly hold his head as if he was in pain. In his mind, he saw Jin Sang and said that if he had been giving up back then, he would have died in the hands of his only little brother. Now rest in peace next to father, Jin Sang added. Kang witnessed Jin Sang pouring the liquid from a bottle onto Woon's mouth while holding the bottle. Kang instantly let out a curse after coming to the realization that Jin Sang had poisoned Woon as well as their father. He was perplexed and questioned what he saw and heard, wondering if it was actually Woon's memories. Creating a target out of Woon by engaging in combat with him despite the fact that Woon has no knowledge of martial arts. Jin Sang was aware of Woon's attempts to find assistance, but he did nothing as his half-brother suffered. Kang also stated that Jin Sang was a pig who shows himself intentionally sleeping with a woman who has taken a marriage vow. Jin Sang was referred to as a bastard by Kang. Kang felt pity for Shin Woon and a tear wanted to fall on his eye. He suddenly looked at his hand that he used on hitting Jin Sang. His eyes widened when he realized he ended up committing a huge accident. The servant was confused by his behavior when he suddenly sat as if he was a kid crying because he thought that the back of Jin Sang who killed the body that he used was returned as level 1. It looks like it's the end for him since he walked the back of his head and things are flowing just like in the previous life. The servant walks up to him and inquires as to what the master means when he says that it's the end. While Kang was sobbing, he turned to the servant and asked where the location was that had the most number of people who had been killed by the bad guys. The servant was bewildered and speechless. He had no idea what to say. In addition, Kang was still wailing. He had the misconception that being the firstborn child of that family would grant him special privileges. But in reality, he was about to meet his demise as soon as he woke up. Jin Sang was holding a vase when he suddenly hurled it on the ground in a fit of rage because of what Woon had done to him. How dare that worthless piece of trash! Jin Sang let out a yell. He questioned Quack about whether or not he ought to go now and rip him to shreds. Quack, however, ordered the guards to be dismissed, and then he advised Jin Sang to compose himself because so many people were watching. But Jin Sang was showing signs of extreme rage, as seen by the furrowing of his brows and the clenching of his teeth. He asks Quack how he can keep his cool if Woon had the nerve to put his hands on him, despite the fact that Woon isn't even capable of competing with him before waking up. Quack observed as Jin Sang's rage caused him to lose his mind. He thought that Jin Sang did not understand that he let Shin Woon get in his blind spot since there's no way for someone like Shin Woon who hasn't studied martial arts. Then he abruptly paused his thoughts because he might overthink everything. Then Quack approached Jin Sang and reassured him that he should not be concerned because Shin Woon will soon pass away once more. When Quack tells Jin Sang that it wouldn't be strange for a person who has already passed away once to pass away again after that, Jin Sang suddenly stops. Quack also stated that he will give instructions to their most reliable disciple to complete the arrangements for the ceremony. Then he left Jin Sang. After hearing those remarks, Jin Sang instantly laughed and thought that Shin Woon was a lucky bastard. Even if Shin Woon had gotten lucky before, Jin Sang was going to convert Shin Woon into a corpse, so he knew that Shin Woon would not get lucky again. Afterward, the name Blood Mist Valley was given to the valley when the moon was shining upon it since it is impossible to survive there. As a result of the unintended consequences of the spells performed by both sides approximately 200 years ago, the battlefield in the Great War was coated in most of the substance, a place so restricted that even a native of Hyangju would steer clear of it. However, Kang was quickly running out of breath as he climbed the valley since the body that he had reincarnated into and which had previously belonged to Shin Woon was so difficult to move due to the fact that it was excessively large. When he finally enters the restricted area, despite the fact that he was beginning to perspire, he breaks into a broad smile because he realizes that this is the ideal setting for practicing his necromancy. Because of the number of violent deaths that took place there, he reasoned, the ground in that area has taken on a distinct hue, which indicates the presence of a powerful spirit. However, there are a lot of them that he wants to take, but for the time being he can only take the white ones. He laid his palm on the area of the ground that was white, and all of a sudden, light appeared upward on the ground. It is indicated by the hologram that his skilled death has been triggered, and that his spirit is compatible with the present skill rating. He was now extracting the souls of the departed out of their bodies. He was informed by the hologram that he had successfully extracted spirit from the deceased and absorbed it into his body. In addition to this, he was able to distill spirits of a greater quality as he advanced in rank and mastery. He was now absorbing the Kai of the dead man's poison. Because of his talent in poison resistance, the incoming damage has been partially mitigated. The hologram also cautioned him about the potential for mental shock and informed him that he would briefly be able to hear the dead. On the other hand, because of the force that he was experiencing, Kang's teeth were clenched and he was sweating profusely. He believed that in order to succeed, he had to go through the same struggles too. However, that is only true for typical necromancers due to the fact that he was accustomed to the suffering. The hologram alerted him abruptly to the fact that he was currently absorbing a small quantity of yin mana from the deceased. That was the reason for his quick clenching of his fist. He has now reached level 2, at which point additional skills will become available to him. These include the skill of skeleton mastery, the skill of hypnosis, an increase in his attack at the new level 3, and an increase in his dexterity at the new level 2. In level 4, not only did his mana and health both grow, but his mana also grew by 3. On the other hand, it was only for applying the skills once, and he could hardly do that with the hordes of low-rank monsters he had to slay. When he watched the notification appear on the hologram, he pondered the question of why his mastery had increased by 3 for just one use. He believed that it was a useful bonus for veterans of the game, but he is willing to take advantage of it because he can unlock skills by either meeting the requirements or leveling up. Now is the time for him to put his newly acquired skills to the test. He reasoned that, in contrast to yang mana, he needed to amass a greater quantity of yin mana in order to properly care for the large physique he possessed. He relaxes on the floor and allows his body to move about freely. In spite of the fact that there was blood on his mouth, he bent his body. After that, he will experience a pain that was penetrating through his entire body, and it will appear as though a light has been tied around his body. Even though it's painful, he needs to keep his attention on the task at hand until the light reaches his heart. Another notice appeared, informing him that the condition had been met, allowing him to unlock another talent associated with Yin Mana Heart. Kang did this because in order for a person to handle mana, they need a circuit that can store mana as well as a mana-capable heart. The greater the number of circles counted around a mana heart, the more yin mana it is able to store as the number of circles increases. After that, he let out a sigh of relief. He claimed that he can feel the filth burning on his body, and that it is gradually having an effect on him. In contrast to the other necromancers, Kang Taeha made the decision to transform his heart into a mana library rather than his brain. The use of mana derived from the brain increases the risk of developing dementia, even if just temporarily. Their mental and physical capacities are deteriorating at an alarming rate as their yin mana level rises. Kang Taeha, being the only person in the world to employ yin mana heart, was spared from experiencing any negative repercussions. However, Kang will try to summon the skeleton. He raises his hand and releases a force that forms lights into the ground. That light released a skeleton who was holding a sword. He walked close to the skeleton. He felt strange after he saw the first creature that he summoned. He thought that it's not good in combat, but he can use it as a scout. Then, he lifts his 2 fingers, then the skeleton releases a light smoke on its mouth and eyes. He summoned another skeleton to test their combat. But Kang was confused when the skeleton gradually vanished. He asked himself if the heart chain is gone but is expecting it, because the amount of mana in that world is only half of the mana in his previous world, and it explains why the skeleton has little mana. He reasoned that if the feed body of a monster that was carrying a mana stone had a yin mana value of approximately 10, then the value of that world would be approximately 1. He instantly let out a sigh since it is impossible to change the situation if there is neither mana nor a monster. After that, he repeated the step where he placed his hand on the ground, and he will now attempt the Death Kai extraction. On the other hand, a few days had gone by at this point. Kang was sneaking a peek beyond the wall when he realized that the security around the home had been beefed up, which led him to conclude that they were observing him. And there is no doubt that his half-brother Jin Sang was the mastermind behind that. He gritted his teeth in irritation because if he had a stealth skill, he could have already strangled those guards, including his half-brother. He tightened his jaw, but despite the fact that he was in a hurry, he shouldn't rush into making any harsh decisions. Therefore, he has left the location where he had been hiding, and he needs to return to his room in order to investigate potential means of evasion. When he was abruptly looking around when he was in his window, he did it because he was concerned that someone might have seen him sneaking out. Because he was exerting so much effort to go through the window, he clenched his teeth and began to perspire heavily. It was difficult for him to walk around in his new body because it was much larger than the one he had previously inhabited. When he finally entered his room, he made a vow to himself that he would start exercising and eating healthier. But when he noticed a man standing in the shadows, he was taken aback, and he opened his eyes in surprise. After suddenly activating his mana circle, he dashes towards the other individual. Kang immediately covered his lips so that he would not be able to generate any noise, and he pointed his hand on the man's neck when the man turned around and was going to shout. When Kang realized that the man was his servant Wang Sam, he was taken aback by the revelation. He suddenly lost his tight grip on Sam and asked him what he was doing in his room without permission. While Sam was trying to apologize to Kang, he was simultaneously struggling to catch his breath. Sam was advised by the latter to forget about the situation, but he was required to explain why he was in his room. Kang was under the impression that Jin Sang had given the command. However, he was perplexed when Sam asked him if he was going outside again because Sam had just noticed that Kang always leave his room at night. When Kang furrowed his brow, Sam remarked abruptly that he didn't tell anyone else. Therefore, there was no need for Kang to be concerned about it. Kang, on the other hand, glanced at Sam for a moment before deciding that it appeared as though he wasn't lying. However, he was taken aback and baffled when Sam asked to come with him and then abruptly ran outside. The only source of illumination for Sam and Shin Woon was the moon. They were on the verge of going inside a shed when Sam stopped Shin Woon and informed him that he didn't have to be concerned because it had never been used before and thus no one would ever go there. Shin Woon was left bewildered as Sam attempted to lift a large box and, as a result of this action, a hole was discovered. Sam revealed to Shin Woon that the hole was an escape route that other servants had been aware of in the past but that, at that time, he was the only one who knew about it. He also stated that he would not inquire as to where Shin Woon was going or why he was going there since he believed that Shin Woon had a valid explanation for his actions. He inquires about Shin Woon, and he plans to wait for him till he returns before proceeding. On the other hand, Shin Woon was under the impression that Sam wouldn't be able to stay alive if Jin Sang found out that Sam had told him about that location and assisted him. He wonders to himself if Sam has any awareness of the repercussions that may ensue if he is discovered. In addition to this, he shared with Sam that while he doesn't currently trust anybody else, he would like to put his faith in Sam for at least one time. "Will you trust me too?" he added, when Sam disclosed to Shin Woon that he places his faith in him. He then quickly extended an apology in advance before placing his hand on Sam's head. Shin Woon makes use of his charm ability in order to ask questions, which leaves the other person with no time to ask questions. Shin Woon, on the other hand, was perplexed because of the response that Sam gave, which was to become instantly bewildered and to remain silent. He was worried about whether or not the charm had actually been successful. He reasoned that perhaps this was the case because the procedure had been carried out on a person who had opened their heart in front of a caster. Shin Woon begins his line of questioning by inquiring to Sam about the nature of his relationship with Jin Sang. Sam informed him that there is no connection between Jin Sang and him. In point of fact, Jin Sang despises him very much, and the reason for this is, well, he can't finish his sentence because Shin Woon interrupted him and asked him why he followed him to such an extreme degree. Shin Woon was under the impression that the effect of the charm was too potent, possibly because the inhabitants of that world lack any form of mental defense. However, Sam explains that the reason he followed Shin Woon was because he was a pure and generous guy who treated him as if he was Shin Woon's younger brother when he was younger. However, after the death of Shin Woon's mother, the concubine and Jin Sang began to harass Shin Woon, which caused the latter's personality to become distorted. He began to beat him and treat him harshly, but Sam has faith that Shin Woon will, one day, change back into a nice and innocent person. After hearing Sam, he immediately snapped his finger to disable the charm talent and claimed that Sam was too stubborn when everyone abandoned him. Yet Sam still followed him. He had the impression that he was treated like a monster throughout his entire life, but he now knows that he can trust someone to have his back. Shin Woon noted that Sam abruptly felt his head and appeared to suffer pain as a result of the charm skill that he employs. As a result of this, Shin Woon advised him to take a short break and lay down for a while. Shin Woon crawls into the hole and tells Sam that he will return later. "Yes, master, I understand," utters Sam. Meanwhile, Shin Woon was informed by the hologram that his level had been raised to 10, and that his mana heart yin had also been raised to the C rank. Shin Woon was sweating because he was holding a force in his hand and he believed that it easily followed the mana circuit. Shin Woon also believed that because it readily followed the mana circuit, he could easily combine it with the yin mana, and he had no choice but to give it a try. When the circuit broke through his chest and entered his heart, he was perplexed and appeared to be frowning while blood poured from his mouth. He was having a hard time, but if he didn't get himself together, his mana circuit would blow up since it wouldn't allow even an ounce of power through. That was bad because the yin mana will reject it. However, the hologram informed him that his necromancy had advanced to the D rank level, and that the mana circle on the mana heart of yin had reached the second circle. In addition, the seals on the bone armor, the shadow bind, and the evil eye have all been strengthened, while the skeleton mastery has been downgraded to the D rank level. Shin Woon is standing and heaving a sigh of satisfaction as he realizes that he has finally completed level 10. Even though he had just informed himself that he hadn't gained a new skill in a while, 3 of them suddenly appeared. It came as a bit of a letdown to him to learn that all of them were merely supportive talents. When will he be able to learn talents such as bone spears and corpse explosion? He wonders to himself. Xinyun's necromancy, on the other hand, has reached the D rank, which allows him to extract death Kai more effectively. But when he peered at those lights on the ground, he was perplexed since the sensations of a white-level spirit and a blue-level spirit were completely distinct, and he had just recently experienced something similar to that. Then he remembered Yu Jin Sang and Guak Ju San, and they had a sensation that was comparable to that. Is this what Kai is? He uttered. In addition, above the blue-level spirits, the amount of yin mana is exceedingly low, but there is also a potent, unexplained force. They emanate a devastating aura similar to that of the yin mana, which is proportional to the power that is able to be drawn from their personalities and skills. However, Xinyun was concerned that what he was about to undertake was too risky, and he pondered to himself whether or not he ought to start off with the less stressful option instead. He put his hand on top of the ground, and a blue light became visible and stretched for his hand. He did this because he was interested in the unknown power on the ground, and he thought that perhaps he might use it as a replacement for the yin mana. As the light passed through his fingers, he began to perspire and was bewildered since he felt hot yet had no rejection. Additionally, it was simple to follow the mana circuit, and he was able to effortlessly mix it with the yin mana. After that, he made an effort, but his brow was furrowed, and blood was dripping out of his mouth. But despite the fact that he was struggling and his hands were gripped, he kept on even as the light traveled through his body all the way to his heart. If he keeps doing it, his mana circuit is going to blow up since it didn't absorb any amount of power, not even an ounce. And this is bad because yin mana is going to reject it. In addition, Xinyun has convinced himself that it is not feasible to reach the mana heart by utilizing that strength. Because of the force that he generated, he was seen clenching his teeth, and his forehead revealed veins that were visible. Because he has no other option, he will have to start a new mana library in order to store the power because generating new mana is a difficult process that places an excessive amount of pressure on the body. However, there is not sufficient energy in the location, and in order for him to survive, he will need to seize the power for himself. However, due to the fact that his body was fighting against the power, he focused all of his concentration on accumulating the power. "Stop fighting and gather down here," he exclaimed. However, after a period of battling and experiencing pain, he suddenly laughed and laid down on the ground because he had succeeded in absorbing the power. On the other hand, the hologram arrives and declares that Xinyun has been successful in absorbing the strange power from the deceased, that the power has been identified, and that he has now absorbed 30 days worth of art-flowing clouds. Afterwards, Xinyun laughs to himself after reading the hologram since he now has a Kai that has increased to level 10 and his mana has increased to a maximum of 200. Because the type of Kai on the second library mana is 1, it indicates that he is capable of storing a wide variety of Kai types. Because he had read that there is a negative effect in mixing too many types, and that his Kai would burst inside of him if he did so, despite the fact that it sounded appealing, he needed to find a means. Nevertheless, all of a sudden he takes attention to what is being described as art-flowing clouds. According to the hologram, the art-flowing clouds is the most fundamental breathing method that the Yellow Mountain faction teaches its apprentices. The holographic also explains that the technique's defining trait is that it utilizes the practitioner's Kai. It is of the second rate and possesses blade qualities in addition to its rank. However, because of the slow rate at which it accumulates power, it is challenging to master. He jumped up all of a sudden and questioned himself, should I try the art-flowing cloud? However, he was apprehensive, which is why he chose to try it when he completely grasped what the art-flowing cloud was. Xinyun raises his hand and thinks to himself, how shall I use the mana and the Kai? As he does so, following that, he issues an order for the skeleton warrior to stand. Xinyun was perplexed because he had only used the yin mana because he believed there would be some negative side effects. But he questioned whether or not his control had already improved while he was gazing at the skeleton warrior, who had suddenly appeared and was carrying an axe. Afterwards, he was utilizing his Kai in an attempt to summon a skeleton. He raises his palm, and an energy goes by his heart, which is positioned at his chest. Although he didn't intend it, he was pleased by this, as the yin mana mingled with the Kai. He took a glance at his hand and was surprised to see the amount of power he already held, and he was only becoming stronger. As a result, he conjured forth another skeleton that emerged from the ground as he placed his hand there. When he saw the skeleton, which appeared to be very large, his jaw dropped. Now, this is it. he uttered while forming a smile on his face. Xinyun was so confused about the two skeletons that he summoned and didn't know what's going on. He turns to the skeleton without clothes who has only the characteristics of white skeleton swordsman with the strength of 18, agility of 16, health 16, magic power of 5 and seems like a level 7. However, the skeleton with clothes has a characteristic of a third-class warrior. Its skill is Flowing Cloud 13 sword, the strength was 50, its agility was 31, and has experience for about 1 year. Afterwards, Xinyun suddenly got interested in the skeleton with clothes because its strength was higher than him and also being able to use martial arts on top of that. He thought that the only thing he needed to be cautious about was his experiences, and that means summoning the skeleton with clothes purely through mana is impossible. And since the skeleton was already summoned, he have to check it out. So he lifts his finger and commands the two skeletons to make a combat. After that, the two skeletons abruptly formed their stance and were about to attack each other. The white skeleton leaps up unexpectedly and raises his weapon in preparation for an assault on the skeleton warrior. However, the skeleton warrior sidestepped his blow. Because of this, the weapon that belonged to the white skeleton fell to the ground. However, the white skeleton continues to strike out at the skeleton warrior, who continues to avoid each blow, and as a result of the final blow that the white skeleton delivers, he suddenly falls to his knees on the ground, and it is now time for the skeleton warrior to launch an assault on him. Nevertheless, Xinyun was keeping a close eye on them. He observed the footwork that the white skeleton executed, but the skeleton warrior lost all of his health in such a short amount of time. On the other hand, the skeleton warrior suddenly sprang up and the white skeleton was about to assault it when it suddenly stood up as well, and went to attack it. They were both moving quite quickly as they got closer to one another. However, the white skeleton was taken aback when the skeleton warrior unleashed a force in its weapon and struck. As a consequence of this, the force that the skeleton warrior unleashed impacted the weapon of the white skeleton, and it was flung because the white skeleton used his weapon to dodge the force that the skeleton warrior unleashed. When Xinyun gave the command for it to stop, the skeleton warrior suddenly stopped just as he was about to hit the white tiger in the neck. However, Xinyun was impressed by their fighting prowess, so he decided to deactivate his summoning power, which resulted in the two skeletons gradually disappearing into the ground. He activates the status window, and then the hologram appears. He makes a remark about how the two skeletons have been fighting for a considerable length of time, but the total quantity of Kai that they have used is just 10. He still has some mana available to him. He wondered himself if it was because it was more effective when partnered with Kai, and if that was the case, that was good news for him, especially considering how difficult it was for him to absorb yin mana at the moment, while his inner Kai didn't appear to replenish on its own. In addition, he reasoned that there were two ways to solve his issue. Either he should find a service guy and extract the death Kai from him just like he did, or else he should train in martial arts. Afterwards, when Sam discovered that his master had an interest in martial arts, he was taken aback. He had the impression that his teacher had spent his entire life trying to stay out of fights, but now he has become interested in learning martial arts, which is something new for him. Therefore, he inquired with his master about the type of martial arts he should study. In response, Xinyun inquires of Sam regarding the possibility of the existence of a martial art that is capable of absorbing the inner Kai of the adversary. On the other hand, Sam unexpectedly turned his head to glance behind him because he was concerned that there were people nearby who could overhear their chat and ask his master to speak more quietly. He inquired if it was the absorption technique that he wanted to learn, and then he told his master not to ask anything about absorption Kai. He did this because, as a result of the conflict that occurred 30 years ago, many people have been detained recently, even if it was for nothing more than uttering the maw of magic. In addition to that, he cautions his master to watch what he says at all times, regardless of where he is. Sam was continuing trying to explain things to Xinyun, but the latter appeared uninterested and kept trying to cover his ears because of how loud Sam was being. However, Xinyun pays no attention to what Sam has to say about it and instead thinks about the demonic arts and the art of flowing clouds. However, the art of energy absorption is the thing that he needs to keep in the back of his mind the most. After that, Xinyun abruptly rose up and let out a sigh as he appeared to be dozing off for some reason. He gave Sam the directive to inform him of the locations at which the members of the Beacon clan learned and practiced martial arts. In response to his master's question, Sam informed him that there is a library where all the documents that have been passed down through the years are collected and archived. In addition, Xinyun put his hand on the servant's shoulder and extended an invitation for him to accompany him to the library. However, the servants were not permitted to enter the library, so Xinyun made a promise to the servant that if he ever became the owner of the palace, he would make it possible for him to access the library. The servants were at a loss for words and appeared astonished by the situation. Sam, upon observing that his master was going to depart, remarked that he would remain here and wait for his return. In addition to this, as Xinyun was ready to leave, he abruptly turned around and asked his servant who throughout the history of the Beacon clan has been considered to be the strongest. In response, Sam became excited when he told his master that the strongest in the history was Lord Liu Xinyun, the one who established the Beacon clan 200 years ago. After Lord Liu Xinyun rose up and became the strongest, he was termed the Fan Gumho by the people. Okay, I'll get going, uttered Xinyun. On the other hand, Xinyun proceeded to the library with his usual composure as he walked there. He was considering Lord Yu, who asserts that he is the strongest person in history. He is unable to fathom the military prestige that Lord Yu possesses. The rankings were 3rd class, 2nd class, and 1st class crown and transcendence, and the skeleton that he had built previously was most certainly of the 3rd class variety. On the other hand, he needed to determine how great of a power gap there would be between a transcendent soldier and a 3rd class swordsman. In addition, something about the way people were talking behind his back when he walked by them attracted his notice and drew his attention. A lady has commented that Xinyun appears to have lost weight and warned against making eye contact with him due to the possibility that he is drunk. The old man, however, claims that it appears as though he did not go to the jibang, which is an Eastern hostess bar, and that he did not consume alcohol these days. However, the lady told the man to wait since Xinyun was going to be arranging the bed linens in a short while. However, Xinyun chooses to disregard the rumors that have been spread about him and instead wonders aloud whether there is someone more infamous than their rumors. Because his senses have been heightened, Xinyun is now able to hear a wide variety of things. He made the decision to separate himself from the people who were spreading rumors about him since he knew that people of that nature would invariably follow the powerful one. But he reasoned that since his reputation could not fall any worse, he would be forced to do whatever was necessary, despite the fact that he had never intended to take the role of a benevolent monarch in the first place. Afterwards, at the main entrance of the Gathering Cloud Library, there were 3 men standing watch. When they saw Xinyun walking towards them, everyone was taken aback and baffled by what they saw. Xinyun was confronted by the one who appeared to be the leader, who appeared as though he could not believe that Xinyun was present and asked Xinyun what brought him to the library. He speculates to himself whether or not the man in front of him was the head gang, a typical sleazy opportunist, and it appears that he was also a follower of Jin Sang. Xinyun asked the leader what else he thought he would come to the library, of course, to read. However, the man seemed to be thinking and was teasing him and said that there were no books Xinyun was looking for in the library. How would you know what book I'm looking for? Asked Xinyun. In response, the 3 men laugh at him all of a sudden, and the top gang member says the book is not the one he was searching for because the book he was looking for depicted a lot of lingerie. The head gang believed that it was a chance for him if he insulted Xinyun and shooed him away, as this would cause his master Jin Sang to pay attention to him. After that, Xinyun abruptly lets out a sigh of frustration and puts his head in his hands because of the annoyance that he was feeling. He claimed that the problem, which follows him wherever he goes, is that those tiny worms might meddle without knowing where they are. After hearing that Xinyun had referred to him as a worm, the head gang member furrowed his brow and became agitated. Consequently, he confronted Xinyun, but Xinyun was annoyed with the head gang, so he told him to step aside and then turned around to go into the library. However, the head gang suddenly put his hand on Xinyun's shoulder to prevent him from continuing. Xinyun shocked the head gang when he abruptly turned his eyes on him, flashed a fiery crimson, and became furious. After that, Xinyun removed the hand of the head gang member that had been resting on his shoulder. The head gang member was now trembling in dread and sweating. Xinyun then left them and entered the door. However, the head gang seemed to be taken aback, which is why his 2 comrades were trying to get his attention by asking why he could so casually allow Xinyun travel through the library. And what about the faction leader Quack? Because the leader of the gang appears to be perplexed, they continue to scream out his name. Despite this, the head gang was dripping with sweat from head to toe and shivering with anxiety. In his head, he communicated to his 2 other comrades that he needed help since he had seen Xinyun's eye and realized that it did not belong to a human. It was like reliving the terrifying experience he had the first time he saw a tiger for the first time. In addition to this, his 2 comrades both dropped their jaws and were taken aback by the fact that he did urinate on his pants out of fear for Xinyun. The head gang was still surprised and still shaking in terror, which is why his two comrades carried him, because he might do a bigger one in addition to peeing if he saw Xinyun twice, and they will take the head gang to the clinic. In addition, one of the head gang's comrades unexpectedly directs his attention to Xinyun, who has arrived at the library at last. He was thinking about how Xinyun had scared their head gang, but he reasoned that Xinyun changed his attitude after returning from the dead and asked himself if he was a son of a tiger. However, Terror Eyes worked perfectly for Xinyun despite being D-rank. Inside the Beacon Clan Red Cloud Tower, faction leader Quack pushes a door that leads to the underground and enters a room where numerous people wearing red masks and clothes, a mummy lying on a bed, and a statue of some creature seems waiting for him. Hajayam, vice leader of the Red Cloud, greeted Quack. The latter asked Hajayam, still not adjusted to their setup. However, Hajayam suddenly bowed his head and apologized to Quack because he must still have habits from the sect, but he will keep everything in mind. Hajayam was informed by Quack that Xinyun had reportedly visited the Gathering Cloud Library. However, Hajayam reasoned that Xinyun's activities were still within their expectation, and that he must have been afraid of his abrupt death followed by his revival in such a manner because of his deeds. On the other hand, Quack immediately thought, since what Hajayam said was exactly his thought, but the issue is that it does not appear that way to the child. Hajayam suddenly sighs because Jinsang was the reason for Quack's annoyance even after they firmly built his foundation. According to Quack, the natural stupidity of Jinsang was the reason why they chose him. Then Hajayam suddenly thought that Jinsang might be good for them. He explained to him that if someone who doesn't know a single thing about martial arts and learns it from some random book suffers from a state of chaotic inner energy, then they would have solved their problem without lifting a finger. Quack suddenly forms a grin on his face, then says that it's a possibility, but they have to get some insurance first. However, Hajayam was going to report something on Quack, but since he was there, he showed him something behind his back and told him that they had already concluded their preparations. Quack, on the other hand, was relieved when he discovered mummified remains in the bed and the skeleton of an unknown species hung on the wall. Under the skeleton were a number of human head skeletons. Quack issued the command for his subordinates to carry it out tonight without delay. They dedicated their efforts in every way to the red sky. Then he parted ways with them. On the other hand, in the Gathering Cloud Library there were two people guarding the entrance. A person with black hair asks his companion if it's really fine to leave Xinyun like that, and what will they do if he becomes mentally unstable. The bald man, who seems sleepy, scolds him for being noisy and reminds him not to give any help for Xinyun if he doesn't want to be kicked out of the clan when Jinsang becomes the leader. The bald man also reminds his companion not to bother interfering when Xinyun was learning martial arts or trading it away, and think of his family when the person with black hair said that there shouldn't be proper martial arts books left in the Beacon clan's library nowadays. However, Xinyun was inside the library and heard all the conversations of the guards outside. He told himself that it doesn't make sense to try learning martial arts by pulling out any book. Anyway, he doesn't need any help from the guards because it looks like he is just skimming over things in their eyes. He was reading about the art of the Black Wolf Judge, the hologram that states that it's a martial arts used by Dead Sea Black Wolf, Do Hee Su, who was infamous among the vagabonds in the Hubei area. Its energy accumulation is quick, but there's the drawback of major pressure points worsening due to accumulating other impure energy. Xinyun abruptly put the book down and had the notion that if it is first rank advanced grade, then it is the highest ranked martial arts book that has been published up to this point. However, the disadvantages are too great because it is a clever art. Therefore, he was wandering about the interior of the library looking for a book that could be of assistance to him. He reasoned that there was a good chance that he would deteriorate into an unstable state if he amassed his inner Kai by the use of a crafty or diabolical art. He needs to become skilled in a high-ranking martial art that has the most consistent and unadulterated Kai. However, if he had accumulated a greater quantity of yin mana, then it would have refused him a lesser amount, and it is currently resisting his inner Kai with all of its might in order to avoid being consumed by it. He is perplexed as to why there aren't any creatures falling from the sky. It had been 8 hours since Xinyun entered the library, and he was still there reading a book. According to the hologram, the art of Unbreakable Heart is of a first-rank exceptional grade, and it is a form of art that was combined with martial arts by Huang Yachol, also known as the Unbreakable Fist. Huang Yachol was a martial artist who was trained at the Shaolin Temple. Its energy is pure, just like the martial arts practiced in the Shaolin Monastery. Yet there is a danger involved in releasing energy because it is a combination of two different styles of martial arts. The hologram inquires as to whether or not he is interested in studying the art of unbreakable heart. But Xinyun has no other option because that is the only form of martial art that is considered to be of a higher grade. However, Xinyun heard a bumping sound coming from the direction of the wall as he was seated on the floor. He jumped up to investigate the source of the noise and spotted a little girl walking forward while lugging a number of books and a box. The young girl's mouth sprang open and her eyes widened in shock when she realized that she had accidentally run into Xinyun. She quickly expressed her regret while fighting back the tears that threatened to form in response to the anxiety that she was experiencing. Xinyun approached the young girl and inquired about the books that she was carrying about while pointing at it. The little girl said that the books are the damaged books that they got as extras for purchasing other martial arts. She was surprised when Xinyun instructed her to lead him to the place where she gathered all those books. However, the girl was sitting and watching Xinyun reading, thinking the latter was weird since it always sighs after reading books that she gave. When Xinyun asked for another book, she asked him if it was okay to learn those kinds of things. In response, Xinyun asked the little girl if she was worried about him. He instructed the little girl to try her best and picked one out, and if she picked a good book he would buy some snack, but he can't recall the name of the little girl and ask what it is. In addition, the little girl was delighted after hearing Xinyun. That's why she introduced her name as Dan Soyeon. She parted ways with Xinyun in order to search for an interesting book, and a minute later she returned with the book and handed it to him. Xinyun grabbed the book in his hands and remarked that it is an older and more worn-out book. When Xinyun unexpectedly caressed her head and informed her that she has worked so hard and late because of him, Soyeon was perplexed. Xinyun also told her that she can buy as many snacks as she likes because she has worked so hard because of him. The delight that Soyeon was feeling regarding the sweets that Xinyun had purchased for her was evident in the twinkle that appeared in her eyes. Afterwards, Xinyun came back to his room and tried to practice the severing art of the Eastern Shining Sage. It was a martial art made by an unknown man who focused on the harmony of all creation. It has the power to encompass and embrace any energy, and its destructive power is very lacking because it was not made for combat. The Kai release section is not included due to the damages done to the later chapter, and there could be problems when trying to learn it because it is incomplete in damaged martial art books. On the other hand, Xinyun was working hard and breaking a sweat because he was trying the art of the Eastern Shining Sage encompassed and embraced everything, regardless of whether the item was rare or was trash in any event. But he has a counter-argument, which is that there might be a significant obstacle in the way. And so he is concentrating because there is a good possibility that it has a secret component, and he has to find a way to lock it down. He was having such a hard time that he wrinkled his forehead and gritted his teeth as he struggled. He believed that the absence of destructive force could be compensated for with yin mana, and that the release of Kai could be accomplished with the mana library. However, there is no middle ground when it comes to yin mana, and he may have been able to combine the two when he reached the third circle of mana. He needs to collect more yin mana, so thank God he can take a break in the middle of it even if it could potentially take longer time. During his relaxation, he was startled when he detected something behind him, and he was even more startled when he saw a greenish energy moving toward him. Because the emerald light appeared to be permeating his entire body, his eyes widened in an expression that suggested he was afraid. He was perplexed as the energy flooded his body and flowed into his entire body instantaneously, and he was unable to stop it even though all of his mana circuits were wide open. On the other hand, the hologram alerted him to the situation and claimed that the curse of death had been placed on him by an unknown being. It was an irresistible energy of death that started to encircle his entire body. It was beginning to consume him. Xinyun was irritated, but then all of a sudden he thought about Jin Sang. Jin Sang was the only one who would want Xinyun with such a high level of death energy. That world was not restricted to solely martial arts, and the curse is more closely related to the hunter's power in his former life. Hence, it is not surprising that the physician in his prior world was unable to figure it out. Afterwards, when Xinyun understood that the energy of death was a coincidence with a great fortune, he broke out laughing and was overjoyed. This was because the energy loaded with the power of death was a blessing for him rather than a curse for a necromancer like him. In addition to that, it possesses a sufficient amount of mana to fill the mana heart capacity of the second circle. If the bowl is small, you can just overflow it. He added, "It appears that faction leader Quack is performing some sort of rite in front of the mummy alongside one of his subordinates." He was appreciative of the fact that Jin Sang's subordinates had sent a death curse, which resulted in a significant amount of yin mana being absorbed. On the other hand, for a necromancer like Xinyun, being cursed is similar to being baptized. He wasn't going to let all of that unused mana go to waste, that was for sure. After achieving success in completing all 3 mana library circles, you will receive an appropriate rank increase as well as new abilities that correspond to the completed circles. However, Xinyun had around the same level as a hunter with a B rating. The hologram revealed that the rank of his yin mana heart had increased to C+, that the yin mana heart that stacked yin mana had reached 3 circles, and that his talent as necromancy had reached rank C+ due to the fact that all necromancy talents received mastery points. As a result of his skill's skeleton mastery having reached its highest possible level of mastery, the skeleton monk and the skeleton lancer are now available to be summoned. Xinyun, on the other hand, was taken aback by the rapid rate of growth, as well as the fact that this life is superior to the one he lived before. But he doesn't want to stop there because he wants to experiment with something while he's still holding the mana library in his stomach and heart. In addition, he stated that an increase in yin mana is making it simpler to accept the Sage Kai, and that the art of flowing cloud is also fusing with it as a result of this. When the hologram revealed that the rank of the severing art of the Eastern Shining Sage had been decided, he was taken aback. The holographic also revealed that the rank is too high for the tier peak. As a result of Xinyun's successful recreation of the severing art of the Eastern Dazzling Sage, he was graded. When the hologram also informed him that his level had increased to level 15, he couldn't contain his joy at the news. He now possesses new abilities, including the Shadow Whisper Mystery, the Hasten Rot, and the Bone Wall, which he recently acquired. Additionally, the hologram included information regarding the severing art of the Eastern Shining Sage, also known as the Flowing Down Cloud. It is a form of martial art that was developed with the idea that everything in the universe flows together. Through the changes made by Liu Xinyun, it has the ability to calm and combine all types of Kai. Both its destructive power and its capacity to eject Ya have been increased. In terms of its power and independence, it is currently comparable to a typhoon. The acceptance ability can absorb any form of power, while the cleansing ability can cleanse any kind of power. Nevertheless, the powers are contingent upon the user's level of martial accomplishment. However, as a result of Xinyun's enjoyment of the descending cloud, his frame advances 2 ranks, moving from E to C. However, he remained unclear as to the nature of the inherent ability that was depicted on the hologram. When the light first entered Xinyun's chamber, he didn't realize that the sun had already risen, so he stood up and stretched his body.